very, very exciting show today. I'm so excited about this. My dear friend, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, has a new book. He's on to share that with us. Folks, this is an important conversation that we need to have in America. Our guest today is Mr. Tim Goeglein, and he is a former special assistant to George W. Bush. He's a vice president at Focus on the Family, and he just is one of the most connected and plugged in influential, socially conservative Christian family leaders in America, and he has been for a long time. And on top of that, he's my dear friend, and he's been a longtime friend and supporter of Family Policy Alliance. It's a real privilege to have you here with us, Tim. Please come on in and join us.
It's a real pleasure and honor to be with you, Craig. We at Focus on the Family love everything about Family Policy Alliance, and it's so great to be in a wonderful coalition with you and all of your wonderful team.
Well, thank you, and it's such a blessing to work with Focus, where we were actually founded within Focus. For those of you that are listening that don't know that, and where we still get the privilege of partnering in so many things. But today we're talking about, I just love the title of your book, Tim, Toward a More Perfect Union. That's a motion. You start this by going in a motion toward a more perfect union. And then you say the moral and the cultural case for teaching, the American story, the American values, and the rest of us. So that's the book that we're talking about. And I'll promote the book as you and I talk, but it's Toward a More Perfect Union. It's a privilege to have you on here. Tell us about the book.
I'd love to, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. In my role at Focus on the Family, Craig, I travel about a third of the time. And over the course of the last 3 years, and I really should say 3 to 5 years, because it was before COVID as well, north, south, east, or west, regardless, frankly, of where I was, after a set of remarks or a speech, typically you open up for questions, comments, concerns with pinpoint accuracy. I could be in California, I could be in Oklahoma, Florida, Colorado, New York, wherever. People overwhelmingly could almost with pinpoint predictability say the following. I've never been more concerned about my country. Secondly, if they have children or grandchildren, I'm particularly concerned about the kind of country I'm leaving to them. And the third thing was the following: I don't know what to do. And I promise you, Craig, if I heard that refrain once, I've heard it countless times. And so after having listened to this and really listening to what people were asking and concerned about, I decided to dive into the research to find out how is it that in this really remarkable country, we have now had 3 generations of young Americans who don't know the story of America. How did that happen? Was it bad teaching? Was it, what? And what I found overwhelmingly is 2 things. I found that it was intentional to misinform and to propagandize young Americans. This has been going on now for about 50 years. And I spent a lot of time in Toward a More Perfect Union speaking about how and where that came from. But secondly, and I think this is so crucial, I did not just want to lay out what the problem is or what the concern is, although I think it's important we take time to do that. I think we're morally honor bound to say, what is the problem? Where did it come from? What is its scope and depth? But the second part of the book and the larger part of the book is what to do about it. What are the solutions? How are we as a country, culture, and civilization going to actually address this series of problems? So that's why I wrote Toward a More Perfect Union. And I have to say, the early part of the book publishing has had an electric start. I'm very grateful, honored before God. I think people are really interested in this theme.
Well, I can tell you because I know your history, and that's why I wanted to have you on the show. We wanted to share this with our audience. Tim Goeglein is with us. He's a vice president of Focus on the Family. He's special assistant to George W. Bush. He's written other books, and he's talking about his new book, Toward a Perfect Union. We want you to, folks, if you're enjoying this interview, we want you to share. We want you to like. We're also putting up links for you so you can check out toward a more perfect union, the moral and cultural case for teaching the American story. And, Tim, my next question is, your book infers that there is something different about the American story in the way America teaches things. Please share with the audience what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'd be delighted to do so. I begin the book, Craig, by saying that one of the most important conversations on this topic I've ever had was with the late, great historian David McCullough. I really think he's one of our, was one of our finest historians. And he told me, Craig, that he had insomnia. He said his insomnia was rooted in the deepest concerns possible for the rising generation of young Americans and what they don't know. And he spoke to me at length about the kind of historic and cultural illiteracy which he felt was a plague on our nation. So in starting the research of my book, I literally jumped into huge empirical data and research to better understand just how bad this problem is. I must say, it was worse than I think. And I speak as an inveterate optimist. And I want to give you a couple of examples, if I may. One of the things I was particularly intrigued by and shocked by was a test which is given to all people, legal immigrants, who want to be citizens of the United States. It's a very basic test. And this particular test, Craig, was given to a huge number of public school students across the United States. I hope most people are sitting down because when you learn the stats, it's shocking. Only 1 in 4 could name George Washington as the first president of the United States of America. Less than 10% knew that there are 9 members of the United States Supreme Court, and not even 30% knew that the president of the United States is the head of the executive branch of government. By the way, what is particularly concerning and sobering about these statistics, Craig, is that as Americans move through primary, secondary, and then college and university, the numbers actually get smaller as to what they know, not bigger. So we have a major problem literally at every level of American education. And as I said when we began our great conversation, the question is why? And what I found is that there have been a number of people who willfully wanted to erase the American story. They were much more interested in misinformation, propaganda, and literally the kind of wokeism, cancel culture, and erasure that we think of now has really been going on for more than 35 years. And so I wanted to spend an entire chapter on Howard Zinn, who is unfortunately now called an American historian. But Craig, his textbooks were the most widely used American history textbooks for young Americans. That he was a neo-Marxist. He was completely at war with the story of America. And I'm particularly sorry to say that I think that his version of the United States and our history has now become the standard version in far too many public and private and Christian schools. I mean, it's really concerning.
Well, it's a really, I'm with you, concerning. People would use more powerful words than that. I know some of you at home might do that as you're listening to this interview. The American story is a powerful thing. And one of the things that you talk about is restoring American values. What are some of those values that are being obfuscated that we should be talking about restoring in America?
I think the most important is truth. I think that in an era of moral relativism and nihilism, which have powered the kind of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda in our schools, I think that that's the seedbed of it. But I think, as our second president, John Adams, famously said, facts are stubborn things. And another U.S. senator many years later, Craig, famously, and I think kind of humorously said, everyone is entitled to his own opinions, but not everyone is entitled to his own facts. And I think that this is part of the restoration and the renewal and the regeneration that we seek and need and want if we are to continue as a free nation. I think that liberty and freedom is very fragile. And I think we have to preoccupy ourselves with the rising generation of young Americans. We have to go tell a new generation. We have to go tell them and have them actually read the United States Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. They need to understand the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is the firm foundation of our nation. And one of the things I expressly did not want to do in this book is simply, to kind of counter propaganda with more propaganda. That's always a failure. And the worst thing you can possibly do. We have to be comfortable with the fact that no nation in the history of the world is a perfect nation. And that's why I use the preamble to the Constitution as part of the title. Toward a more perfect union, which is to say, we're not perfect. We are all fallen. We all fall short of the glory of God, including great nations. But that does not erase the fact that objectively, this is the greatest nation in the history of mankind. I mean, the achievements for freedom and the sharing of freedom and liberty is really genuinely, truly without precedent in the history of the world. And those who are so much in opposition to the United States now control so many of our institutions that are the levers of sharing history and culture. And that is expressly, in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges we have in the United States in the 21st century.
And this is exactly why I love your book. We're with Tim Goeglein. He is the author of Toward a More Perfect Union, the moral and cultural case of teaching the American story, why this is so important right now. And Tim, thank you for sharing that perspective you just had. I've got a follow-up question to it because, the question is there hope? And before you answer that, on restoring these values, you really are taking a different approach that I want our listeners to understand. That a lot of people say I'm right and they shout at the other side and they say I'm right. You're taking the approach that the greatest asset we have in the American story is we're going directionally towards something. We can never really be perfect, but we have a way of dealing with these things. It's superior, because it's rooted in these values.
Yes.
And those people are attacking the values now. So some people might feel a little depressed. Some people might feel a little discouraged out there. But should we be hopeful that we can restore some of these values in America?
I promise A to Z, as they say. I'm a hopefulist to the core, but not without reason. I think that we are living in the midst of a parental rebellion. And that's good because it has happened because parents, grandparents, local communities are waking up. And for the first time in all 50 states, people are saying, wait a minute, who's on our school board? Wait a minute, where does the curriculum come from? Who decides the curriculum? How involved should we be in our school? This is incredibly refreshing to be able to recognize that we have a major problem and we have to connect the recognition of a problem to action. So faith and action together. And I think, Craig, if I may, to your second point, I find that refreshing as well, because it's important to ask ourselves, what do we want? What do we seek? And I think that begs another question. Here's a good one. What kind of a country do we want 50 years from now? Because if we can all agree that what we want, and I believe it is that we want an informed citizenry of young Americans who have a rightful reason to be patriotic about their country, who have a rightful reason to love and revere and defend the Constitution, who have a right to and a responsibility to understand the catechesis of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, to understand and to celebrate and to be nourished by the power of the various chapters of American history, the American Revolution, the Civil War, World War I and II, the Great Depression, the Cold War. I mean, these are very important turns in the American story, and how America deals with the most difficult chapters in our national life. And one of the reasons, among many, that we have to be hopeful is that America has had many of these difficult hairpin curves. And without exception, through those chapters of American history, the American people have recognized that we have a problem and that we have to do something about it. And without exception, we have. And so it seems to me that we have all kinds of reasons for hope. And I have a sense that in 50 years, we can confidently say that the best chapters of American history are definitively ahead of us, because in part of the recognition of the problem and doing something about it now.
Well, I'm an optimist by nature, and you and I both know we put our hope in a person too,
Yes.
and that is the return of our Lord and Savior Jesus. So we are hopeful. And Tim, it's been a real privilege to be with you today. I just have one last point that I'd like to make and get your take on,
Please.
which is parents like myself. I have a 21, 19, 15-year-old girls. They're hearing all of this filth, all of this misdirection, and the rest of this stuff. I think your book is perfectly written for a parent to read right now, to be able to go back to my kids and to be able to explain to them what's at stake, what happened, and what we could be doing as a country. And I know you didn't write it necessarily as a parent's guide, but am I right or wrong? And that would be helpful for people to check it out for that purpose.
That really is the perfect grace note for our conversation, because what I say in toward a more perfect union is that the battle for the soul of our nation, Craig, I believe very strongly, begins squarely in our homes, which will then hopefully transform our schools and restore the proper teaching of American history and civics. The great G.K. Chesterton, and I love this, he said, every neighborhood should have a banner. And what he meant by that is that the things and the places and the people closest to home are the places where you can watch and understand the kind of reform and restoration that we want in the country. In other words, the kind of restoration and renewal toward the defense, both culturally and morally, of the great American story, in my opinion, will not begin in Washington, D.C. or Hollywood or Wall Street or Silicon Valley. It's not going to be a kind of a top-down approach. It's going to well up from our homes, our neighborhoods, our communities. Our churches have a very important role here. It's very important that in the life of our churches and communities, that we recognize the kind of goals that we want for the young people who are all around us. And it seems to me that the kind of solutions, the measurable solutions forward to addressing this kind of vacuum of history and culture begins in the home and in the places closest to us. And that's part of the great hope that I have, because that too, localism, is a big part of the greatness of the United States of America.
Well, amen to that, brother. You have given us a lot of encouragement. That's what we do when we wind up our interviews. A lot of encouragement to our audience, folks. The renewal, the restoration in America should be starting in our homes. That's what Tim Goeglein, our guest here, Vice President Focus, has shared with us. His new book, Toward a More Perfect Union, the moral and the cultural case for teaching the American story. We hope that you'll check this out. There's links for you to do that. It's been an absolute privilege visiting with our friend and hearing about these things and the hope he has in the direction of what's available to us from our founding documents, our Constitution, but maybe more importantly, how we can apply that today in our own lives, with our own families, and start from the bottom up a restoration in America. Folks, please share this video. Please like it, comment on it. It's a privilege to be able to bring great authors like Tim Goeglein with you. Please check out the link, and we'll talk to you again really soon.